Well, hey everybody, thanks for joining. My name is Michael DiTullo. I'm a designer and creative director that's been working with Kirei for about a year and a half. I've worked with Nike, Google, Honda, and Hasbro. And I've been working with Kirei on creative direction and their product portfolio. For those of you who aren't familiar with Kirei, they make architectural products, mainly wall and ceiling systems that are all sustainable. So it's a really awesome company. I love the product line. It's great to work with a company that has kind of high standards and values, and tries to bring like a little bit of a elevated kind of design forward focus to their architectural products. One of the other things that's really important to us, most of our products, our Eco Panel products, are made from recycled PET. So products like this are actually made from basically recycled water bottles. But one of the cool things about this product is it comes in one of the broadest color palettes in the industry. So color is really important to us. And we understand for designers, it kind of can make or break the selection in a product. And it can really transform a space, right? Like color can, when selectively used, can make something completely recede into the background, like this gray wall behind me, or it can become the highlight of an entire space. So we spend a lot of time thinking about color and how we can better integrate color into our product portfolios so that we can give designers more options and choices in designing spaces. So super excited today to be talking about that with a couple of panelists. So today we have Michelle Beganskas. I'm gonna try and pronounce it correctly. I got it almost closely, sorry, Michelle. Ashley Kirkland, based out of DC, and Kim Gilbert, who's also a color consultant. So I'm hoping we're gonna have a great kind of free-ranging discussion on how we select color, how we create color palettes, and how that kind of all influences projects. Before we get into that in depth, we'll do a quick kind of 15 minutes on the latest Kirei color palette selection and how we came up with that. Then we'll do 30-minute panel discussion, and then about 15 minutes Q&A so that we can kind of get your questions in and make sure we kind of covered everything that you guys want to hear about today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ann Kalinsky from the Kirei marketing team, who's going to walk us through some of the latest color offerings from Kirei. Take it away, Ann.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you. Let me make sure we have that. And can everybody see my screen, Michael?
Yes.
All good? Okay. Thank you for everyone. Thank you to everyone for joining us this morning. I'm really excited to present this deck, so we're just going to get started. This is the new product release from Kirei, Dream in Color. In celebration of summer, Kirei is inviting you to dream in color with the release of 8 new Eco Panel colors and 5 new Mura colors. From earthy and rich to light and airy, we see colors that inspire designers to build for a brighter and healthier future. These new colors join Eco Panel's already extensive palette of carefully selected colors, creating a rainbow of opportunity, ranging from neutral to vibrant. The new 12mm Eco Panel colors are 124 Ochre, 193 Rouge, 269 Wine, 274 Orchid, 349 Vineyard, 384 Seaweed, 633 Pacific, and 660 Coronet. So let's take a look at each of these colors individually, why they're important, and how to use them. To start with ochre, inspired by life's more grounding moments, ochre's earthy yellow recalls feelings of balanced energy. Rouge's luscious red reminds us to enjoy the sweetness in life with its rich, subtle brightness. Dark but never brooding, wine's elegant red intentionally invites a peaceful strength. Drawing from the delicate side of life, Orchid's gentle purple aims to add a subtle calm. Inspired by our instinctual call to nature, Vineyard's natural green conveys a neutral tranquility. Seaweed's cool green recalls the subdued lushness of the ocean floor and invites a soothing introspection. Inspired by the ocean and the fluidity of life, Pacific's light classic blue conveys a vibrant comfort. And finally, it's a new dawn with Coronet's deep and dusty blue that channels a serene stillness. So here are your 31 flavors of EcoPanel solids. There's a lot you can do with this variety of colors, so we wanted to create a few summer palettes to help spark some ideas. With the current state of the world, we worked to create palettes that inspired adventure and dream of a time when we can answer that call. So, who doesn't love to spend days at the beach during summertime? That's why we created Pacific Daydream, which includes Pacific, Jade, Viridian Green, White, and Ochre. Summer call to travel abroad. The lavender fields in Provence, France are blooming from now until August, so we created Sunrise Reverie, which includes Coronet, Orchid, Blush, Magenta, and Vineyard. And for those who dream of road trips and traveling cross-country, we have Western Drift, which includes Wine, Rouge, Yellow, Ochre, Seaweed, and Dark Orange. To round out the EcoPanel solid panel color palettes, there are 10 24mm colors and 5 7mm colors. We're also really excited to announce 5 new Mira colors, which include Wine, Ivy, Vineyard, Blush, and Onyx, which brings our EcoPanel Mira palette to 15. That's all for the deck. Thank you again for joining us. We're really excited about these new colors and we hope you'll check them out. Please go to kireiusa.com/samples to request any samples so you can see these in person. They're very beautiful colors. Highly recommend samples. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out. We're really excited to see what everybody does with these.
Thanks, Anne. Really appreciate just kind of that quick walkthrough of the latest colors for Kirei. And yeah, just again want to highlight that all of those products that you saw in the deck are made from more than 60% recycled content. So kind of a really cool thing going on. And if you could stop the screen share, yeah, perfect. And then we'll get into kind of the panel discussion. So I'd like to start just with the participants introducing themselves. So tell us a little bit about where you're from, who you work for, where you're based out of, maybe something about one of your favorite projects, and would love to hear about how you chose the color to wear today, since we'll be talking about color. And you know, I chose basically the brightest shirt in my wardrobe because I knew I'd be with this gray wall behind me. So I wanted to make sure I had some color pop in my frame today. If we could, Ashley, could we start with you? Would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm Ashley Kirkland. I'm the Director of Interior Architecture at Grizform Design Architects. We're located in DC. Most of our projects are restaurant-based, but we also do multifamily and just in general hospitality-oriented projects. I chose this color shirt because I wear a lot of black like most designers. So I was like, I need something that pops today.
Thanks, Ashley. Michelle?
Sure. So my name is Michelle Beganskas. I am working at Ted Moudis Associates, which is located in New York City. We primarily do workplace design, corporate interiors, and similarly to Ashley, I've got a lot of neutrals, but I chose green because I know my brick background is kind of a complementary mix of red and green. So it's kind of what I was planning for today.
Thanks, Michelle. Kim?
Hi, my name is Kim Gilbert, and I am a creative director and color design consultant. I work for myself currently. And I come from the sportswear industry, spent a lot of time at Nike, but have also worked with Converse, with Michael, and have done some work for Lululemon. And currently I'm working with a new startup, which is really exciting.
Well, thank you all for joining us in this conversation. My first question is kind of a big, vague one and somewhat nebulous, but I hope we'll kind of pull forward some interesting conversation. Before we hopped on the public broadcast, we were talking about how this is a little bit of a different topic. You know, lately there's been so many kind of Zoom discussions about what's going on with COVID and how we can adjust and getting back to work, and color is certainly maybe a little bit of a breath of fresh air and something a little bit different to talk about. So I guess just my first general question is, when you're starting a project, do you have a philosophy for how you, or a methodology for how you start pulling together a color palette for a project? Is it very client dependent? Is it industry dependent? Would love to just hear your kind of general top level thoughts on like how you approach color in work. Why don't we start with Michelle?
Sure. So when we start a project, I will say it's very client driven, but we work hand in hand with our clients. So we always start with a vision, a design vision, which is different from our design concept, because the vision is purely about when somebody walks into your new office space, what do you want them to say? What do you want them to feel? It might be different for staff versus visitors, but we always start with a vision and descriptive words. So it might be like high contrast or industrial or casual or anything really, but we start with these descriptive words and we'll compile inspirational images, textures, finishes, samples that all support that vision. So I would say we always start at the highest general level with words, actually.
It's interesting. So kind of like, I find the same, like a very kind of word plus image person, like kind of like happen at the same time.
And it's the words plus vision is, the words plus images is an important one, because a lot of times words can mean different things to people. So when you pair the word with the image and you present it in such a way, you know, everyone is on the same page and we all have the same goal and we're going to create the same soul of a project. So.
How about for you, Ashley?
Very similar to Michelle, we are very hand in hand with our clients. They usually do come to us with a vision. With restaurants, you're really trying to, you know, tell a story and create an experience that somebody will feel like unique and be able to reflect upon later. And so a lot of times it is just, hey, the chef has an idea of something he experienced, and then using those words to kind of translate it into images. And exactly, you know, to Michelle's point, I have a client that tells us a lot of times he wants something funky, but, you know, what does that mean to you? So we always are, you know, pushing and pulling to find out exactly, you know, how that word relates to what they want to see and envision in the space.
Great. Yeah. That's always you know, deciphering the client and then also offering them what they didn't know they wanted. It's such a balance.
Exactly.
How about for you, Kim? This is something that, you know, you is kind of your daily stock and trade. Like, how do you kind of kick off a mental framework for developing a palette for a project?
I would say, yeah, definitely having a conversation with the client and finding out what does this product need to do, where is it going, who's going to use it, what are we trying to, what kind of story are we trying to tell? So like I was saying, I'm working with a new client and I've had the privilege of building a brand new palette from the ground up. So absolutely no history to work from. You know, they're launching in this brand new world. So it's been really exciting to sort of like, okay, you know, having worked with brands that have a rich history in color and having to sort of remix and reimagine and sort of working with that history, it's really interesting to turn all of that on its head and think, okay, it's 2020, all of these things are new to our world. What does color look like now? Like, what do those relationships mean, and how evocative do we want to be? Do we want to go soft? Do we want to have more contrast? What sort of feelings are we trying to emote?
And Kim, do you ever have an example where, you know, maybe the client had a vision or a preference to be, let's say, like more conservative, or maybe they wanted to even be on the other side, more wild, but you felt like the right answer for the project maybe was a little bit different? Do you have an example where, you know, that's happened and you were able to kind of shift the client over to where, you know, you felt the right answer was, and how did you do that?
I think for me, it's always giving the client what they want and letting all the holes that might be there, and not try to fill them. But then also presenting like, or we could take it this direction, you know, if, you know, just sort of like answering both bells, like, hey, I heard you. This is what we talked about. This is what this could look like this way, but if we think about it this way and reframe it, it could also be this. So I think just sort of offering two options and never just saying like, no, your initial thoughts aren't right. And I think, you know, it's really helping the client see my vision as a designer. We're coming from different points of view. So I think it's always good to be able to provide sort of two options.
Yeah. How about for you and your team, Ashley, when you're kind of directing your team, how do you balance that, what the client wants and what you feel might be right, and how do you push and pull those parameters?
Right. Well, luckily we have a lot of clients that we, work well with, and they're very open to new ideas. But when they get really inspired by something, we really just kind of like what Kim said, we want to give them what they want. And then we also want to give them some options. And it kind of sometimes leads us both down a path to something that may not have been what we originally started with, but something that everybody's happy with. So definitely options and giving different perspectives and getting inspired by different things.
Yeah. Michelle, have you had any instances of that?
Yes, definitely a lot of our clients tend to have an idea of what they want their office to be, and we love to work with that. But in my opinion, I don't think there really is any right or wrong in terms of design aesthetics, And on our team, we kind of like to pick and choose our battles, right? So if something spatially just is not going to be efficient, or it's not going to work in terms of planning, I think we'll speak up a little bit more and kind of fight for our design. But design is so perceptive, and especially in interior design, where our clients are the ones that have to live there. I don't have to work there. Our clients are going to be working there every single day, spending more time in the office than they are at home. So I tend to work with them on that a lot.
I like that. A lot of people like to say design is very subjective, and I often bristle at that a little bit, because it's, there are subjective elements, but it's kind of our job to make, to put objective handles on those subjective elements. But Michelle, you described it as perceptive, and that's a beautiful way to say it. Design is perceptive, at least it should be. Mm-hmm. One of the things I think that young designers maybe don't understand or as readily, or even if they intellectually understand it, it's kind of hard to emotionally understand coming out of school, is how far in the future we're often working. I think a lot of us are working, sometimes 12 months, 14 months in the future, maybe even further sometimes, just all depends on the project. So with kind of everything going on right now with COVID-19 and spaces and things and attitudes really changing, do you see that kind of affecting kind of color palettes in your work? And Ashley, I'm really interested in your perspective, working so much in that kind of hospitality sector. do you see kind of the approach to color shifting, or maybe intentionally staying the same so that people have a level of comfort? What are your thoughts on that?
I've seen a lot of shift towards wanting things to be natural, because I think a lot of us have been stuck inside for many months, and I think having some of those elements on the inside have been important. You know, and speaking to having to design for the future, you know, the last recession, I had a project I started and it ended up lasting 5 years. And we had to reselect the colors because the colors we picked 5 years ago were a little bit different. And, you know, what we've started to try and always keep in mind is that there's little tweaks that you can do, but there's a couple of elements that are kind of consistent. So I've definitely seen greens and blues and those kinds of elements that speak to nature always getting incorporated in projects.
How about, I think that's, I mean, I think, yeah, the whole kind of biophilia trend, I mean, that seems like, yeah, spot on. And I think what you said makes sense. Like, people want to feel like comfortable and in a natural environment. How about for you, Michelle, and kind of in workspaces, what are your thoughts there?
In workspace, in terms of how things are changing with COVID, I'd say there has been a little bit more focus on what the material is versus what the color is. So thinking about surfaces that are more easily cleanable, and I know this is not a panel about COVID, but just to answer the question, it's less about the color of it and what it looks like and more about the properties of it. But I'm on the same page as Ashley. I tend to pull a lot of colors that are a little bit more timeless, you know, a lot of blues and greens, or even colors that have a real purpose. So a lot of times we're working with colors from our client's brand identity. And those colors, you know, maybe their new office space is coming with a new brand refresh. So those colors are intended to stay in the long haul. So, but just in terms of applying color so that it lasts the time, I think I haven't had an issue with, like Ashley had, where I've had a project last for 5 years and we've ended up changing the color, but I do kind of prepare our projects for having to change color based on other components, you know. So when I'm placing color in a project, I like to think about it in terms of its value or its brightness or its saturation level or muted, whether it's muted or bright. And then if the color itself needs to change, if the client says, oh, I hate green, or I hate, you know, this, we're able to replace the color without really changing the design a whole lot.
Do you have a different approach when it comes to like the architecture, the more permanent elements versus, like, let's say the furniture or some of the other elements in the room? Do you kind of take a different approach based on that?
Definitely. I'd say that most of our projects, the architectural elements tend to be a bit more neutral. Things that can easily be changed as trends change, or furniture wears out. You know, a lot of color tends to be placed on furniture. But something else that I kind of like to try to play with a little bit is what is the feature? You know, if the furniture is going to be colorful and that's the feature, or is the furniture going to be colorful but there's a different color that's going to be an architectural feature? So while I would say yes, mostly architectural finishes tend to be on the neutral side, depending on the design vision or the design concept, we might want to have, and it also depends on what kind of space it is, we might want to have a different feature that's more architectural, and then the furniture might sit back a little bit and support.
How about for you, Ashley? Is that a similar approach? I mean, I'm not sure, when a restaurant is refitted, are they just refitting the whole thing, or are there considerations for kind of like doing like minor refreshes of more easily swappable elements?
Yes, when we do restaurants that are in hotels, we are usually trying to just do smaller modifications, but we definitely have projects where it's a total overhaul, and then you are having to consider like major architectural elements and how those get treated. And, you know, to Michelle's point, very good about materiality of a product, not just their color. So kind of incorporating that in our thought process too.
Yeah. Coming back to Kim, what have you seen any of that kind of difference of approach, kind of, you know, during and hopefully looking kind of post-COVID, like to kind of creating color palettes, any kind of macro looks?
Yeah, I think a core a core neutral palette is always really, really key. And just having that range of grays and browns and just the core colors that are just never going to go away. But I think what you do have to shift is what those relationships are between those colors with each other. Are you doing neutral and neutral, or are you adding a pop element? And I think sustainability plays a huge role in that. Folks are not wanting to invest a lot of money on a pop color, and so just sort of understanding how that influences the placement or the usage, I think makes a big difference. I think we're seeing a shift trend wise from folks just wanting new all the time to having like a really kind of core stable basis to sort of add other sort of less permanent elements to. And I think that I'm sort of now talking in space because you guys are talking about space, but like thinking about like wardrobes. Thinking about how people dress and what the mindset is going forward. I think where the consumerism element, I think, is going to be notched down a little bit in terms of people wanting disposable products. So I think it's really important to be really in tune with how color makes people feel. It's so powerful, to your point, about everything being so subjective. I mean, color is probably one of the most controversial elements in all of design. Not to be dramatic, but it's really, I mean, I'm noticing in the webinar chat window, someone's talking about, someone walking in the room and saying, get rid of that red. And I've dealt with that so many times before I even open my mouth. It's like, nope. It's like, okay. Because color is just so emotional and so powerful, and in ways that people don't even understand. Like it's sometimes, just such an instant response. So as a color designer, I have to be aware of that and what's going to trigger people the right or wrong way.
Well, and it's also definitely one of the elements of design that, one, can be, like you said, so provocative emotionally, and two, I think many people have a comfort level or feeling of being qualified to comment on, whereas they might not feel qualified to comment on other things. Like everybody has had, or many people have had some experience of like picking out a color for something, even if it's just for their wardrobe. So I wonder if it gets a little bit more like vocalized criticism because of that. Would you say, Kim?
175,000%, yes. I would say, again, not to be dramatic, but I to your point, yeah, people make color choices every single day. What shoes, what socks am I going to wear? I mean, literally every day. So yeah, there's this level of accessibility with color. Everyone has had an experience with color, so, but not everyone has drawn a shoe or has designed an interior. So the perception is that it's less technical. And yes, it's not technical really in many ways, but there are a lot of other elements at play that you might not get right off, just as a casual sort of color selector.
Ashley, you mentioned earlier kind of this kind of desire to feel kind of natural in spaces, and certainly kind of biophilia has been kind of a growing trend. What else have you kind of seen kind of in that, and not just in, I guess, in regards to the elements that you're putting into your design, as well as kind of color palettes?
Well, the main element that we've really been putting a lot in is some kind of greenery. And a lot of times our clients they're in between whether it's faux or real, but we've really had a big push towards having those real elements happening within the space. So that's probably one of, I'd say, the biggest impacts that we've been introducing into our projects and maintaining. Another thing is just finding ways to relate back to that biophilia or a natural element. One project, we used this kind of funky lamp that had like a tree trunk base, but it was a metallic silver. So maybe not just always in your face about it being green and growing, but speaking to some organic forms and shapes like that.
And when you're using greenery specifically, like how do you think about the color around it? Are you intentionally like using complementary colors or muted colors to make that kind of greenery pull forward, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, we definitely want it to pop. A lot of our installations of greenery have been on pretty much blank canvases, white, neutral walls, or, you know, the surrounding space is pretty calm, and then letting that, you know, texture and all the different patterns that you can get with foliage kind of speak to the design intent versus it letting the surrounding areas kind of overwhelm that. So yeah, definitely we want to highlight it and let it be the showstopper part.
How about you, Michelle? Have you been working with that at all?
Yes, actually. So I have my master's in sustainable design, and I've done a whole thesis research project really in depth on biophilic design. And it's kind of become my personal mission to include biophilic design in every project, some way, shape, or form. And in my research, I found, you know, exactly how Ashley is describing. A lot of times people associate biophilic design with plants or greenery, and it's an extremely successful way to implement biophilic design, but there are so many representational, like as Ashley mentioned again, about things that may be faux or representational and even experiential ways we can bring nature into an interior. And color is a big one.
Yeah, I've been seeing that across my clients, where I've been trying to push them away from, I think for a big chunk of time in the 2000s, we saw this kind of like return to minimalism and like really stark Bauhaus inspired modernism. And, you know, I mean, that can be great and refreshing, but, you know, the future is a little bit scary right now. And so I've been trying to push clients towards this concept that I call friendly future, where things that are just a little bit more rounded off, a little bit more friendly, and to Ashley's point, it might not be a natural element, but it could still have this kind of organic influence that's a little bit softer and less intimidating.
Yes, very much. I would say that a lot of times, you know, some clients might not be interested in biophilic design because they are having that understanding of, you know, then I'd have to have plants and I don't want to water them and I don't want to take care of them. But even things like you said, just angles that resist a 90-degree angle, curved lines, you know, things that are biophilic and have all of this evidence-based research and scientific backing on their impact to human health and well-being without a single plant. And they all exist, and they're all really sophisticated ways to bring nature inside.
Yeah, just making it feel less of an artificial construct, right?
Yep.
Kim, how about for you in your world? Are you seeing any of those kind of influences?
Yeah, absolutely. I think nature is a huge driver in color, for sure. That the warmer browns, to your point about the minimalism and the, you know, like the stark white and the gray, there's just been so much of that. And I think that is, you know, right now looking and feeling very clinical and not very warm and fuzzy. So I think there's a nice in between there of you know, weaving together the familiar, but also having sort of like an 80-20 of like familiar and new. And I think those can be turned on their heads depending on what's happening in the world. But I would say there's a definite pull towards nature and natural colors right now, for lots of different reasons. So I definitely incorporate a lot of that thinking into my color palettes.
Yeah. I mean, Kim, since this is kind of like what you do every day, what's one thing that you wish you could teach your clients about color? You know, that all your clients would appreciate kind of out of the gate if you could teach them.
That's a great question. I've never thought about that. Let's see. I think that I think again, to just reiterate the power of color and how if you really harness it and have a plan, you're going to be able to capture more people. You're going to be able to engage with more folks.
Yeah.
Have a sort of a flow and a storyline. Be connected to the world around you. You know, you want to look like you know who your customer is. And that you understand who they are and what they're into. So I think just sort of imparting that, like, hey, there is sort of a method to creating this sort of magic.
Not just like, I like red, put it over there.
Yeah. I mean, because, you know, if I just threw around all the colors I like, there'd be a rainbow everywhere. So yeah, it's never about it's interesting. I've rarely worked on products that I feel that I'm the target consumer for, which I think is really it's been fun for me as a designer, because I learn about new worlds, new cultures, new things. But yeah, I think just having folks understand that it's a really, really powerful storytelling element that can be done really well.
Yeah, it reminds me of when I first graduated school in the 90s. I was working for a small design consultancy. We mainly did product design. So every once in a while we did color strategy, and very rarely, but sometimes we did retail interiors and sometimes some corporate lobbies, because one of the directors had kind of come from that world. And I remember I was working on I think it was a conference room and lounge for a client. And my boss said, Michael, you can't just put all the things you like into a room and call that a design. You can't expect for that. You can't just be a collection of things you like. And it's it's silly, but it's that dawning of like, yeah, you have to have a strategy, right? You have to tell a story. And color can be a big part of that story. How about for you, Michelle, when you're working with clients, is there one thing that you wish that you could kind of educate them on color to better use it?
I would say that most of the time we tend to see, or our clients, people tend to see color as a feature. And this kind of goes back to what we were saying before about how a lot of times, especially office designs, tend to be neutral with pops of color, right? But I think my challenge, or what I would want clients to see, is that color can also be a neutral. And I'll explain. So I think that color can be applied in ways that can be perceived as a backdrop or perceived as a supporting element, and that it doesn't just have to be a white and gray box with color. It could be a colorful box with more color, but that it won't be, a space full of color doesn't have to be childish or overwhelming. It can be applied in certain ways. We like to say, our design principal at TMA often says a lot that color doesn't cost anything. So it's also a really good way to, spaces that might be forgotten about in office designs, like the copy room, the printer, like those are spaces that tend to be bland, but doesn't cost anything to give them a little color and liven up even some of those areas that we tend to put on the back burner of design, I guess.
The last company I worked for directly, I was the chief design officer and the company, and I redesigned the corporate headquarters, and the color palette was kind of like a deeper orange, like a little bit deeper than 021, almost like a processed blue, and then kind of like a light warm gray and white. And when the space was refabbed and before all the furniture got in, I remember somebody from accounting doing a tour, like a walkthrough, and he was like, "It looks like a kindergarten in here." And then like after all the furniture came in and a few weeks in the space, he was like, "It's just fun. It feels fun to be at work now." And so that like using color to kind of change people's perception of like what a space can be. How about for you, Ashley? What's the one thing you wish you could tell clients about color?
I think it's a couple elements, but the one thing is to not be afraid to use it. I think a lot of times, kind of on what Kim said, we're telling a story in a restaurant. There's a lot to absorb in there. It's not only the food, but the colors that are around you do impact, how you perceive how the food looks and how it appears. And so I think some clients get really nervous about using certain colors. And so it's kind of our job as designers to kind of help guide them through that and, help them not be as afraid. And so trying to find ways to show them, whether it's through pattern or just, sneaking it in little places, a trim on a piece of furniture, but just to not be afraid of it. Because I know some, they just want it to be very simple and clean and they don't want to offend anyone. And then some, they're really willing to go out there. And so we always like when we can kind of help them not be afraid to use it.
Yeah, to better tell their story, right? Yeah. One thing I've been thinking about as we've been developing new products for Kirei is, like these products have a really high amount of recycled content in them. They're actually, they're cleanable. You can pull them off the wall and like recycle them. But we always struggle with like how much we should make them look like they're made out of a recycled product and how much we should make it look like just like a pure brand new wall or ceiling system. Ashley, when you're working on projects, is there any thought to like how color can or should highlight kind of sustainability in the space, or should it not? Should it just be a secondary story?
We've kind of done a little bit of both. We had a client that really wanted every single thing in his restaurant to be sustainable. Like the whole point of it was they wanted all of it's mushrooms and oysters, which are very renewable resources. And so they really wanted it to be everything from the wall color or the wall covering to any of the surfaces. And so one of our countertops in there had a lot of recycled glass bottles, and you can actually like see that it's glass bottles. So he wanted everybody who came into that space to know that every material you're standing on is that way. We've had other clients that it's not as important to them, but it's still important to us. So for instance, we did a rooftop design and we had lots of different color furniture, and certain pieces do better in the sun than others. And, if you have something that's going to fade in 2 seasons, you have to replace it. We wanted to be cognizant of that. And so just selecting and being mindful of those products and where you're using them and being able to still tell a sustainable story, even if that's not the client's main mode.
Yeah. How about for you, Kim, in the sportswear world? I mean, that's not something that usually is kind of like a pulled forward visual story, though I guess sometimes it can be. What are your thoughts there?
I think in terms of telling sort of like a really overt sustainability story, I think there are really interesting ways to do it that are not, super organic looking, and maybe just having cues towards that and not sort of hitting everyone over the head. If I think about just sort of in terms of the history of trends, and if we sort of compare where we are right now, maybe to the late 60s, early 70s, where you had your avocado green and your harvest gold, and it was just like warm tones and nature and all of it, it was just like one on top of the other. And I feel like if you take that times, living in a more, I would say not like full minimalist, but like somewhere in between that, like having a million plants everywhere to having like what's what's nature times technology, basically. So like kind of having those two things go hand in hand, because I think we see so much bright color through our screens all day long. So that does affect how we look at color in general. And so, you know, the eye is often drawn towards the different, the thing that's different, right? So that's where you see the muted tones and like the more earthy things kind of being really appealing to folks, because it's the opposite of what they've been looking at all day. So I think it's sort of you know, weaving those two things together, and getting the proportions right. To your point, you know, it's actually about folks being afraid to use color, especially in terms of like having to replace items or things. But I think when the proportions are correct, it can be really exciting and feel fresh.
I think like you can be, what I'm taking away from what you said too is like, you don't have to be overt, you can be clever. And it reminds me, I remember last time I was in London, I went to this restaurant called Pharmacy, but it was, you know, it was spelled with an F instead of a PH, because it was like this kind of farm to table restaurant. But it was, they played with that concept of like, it was basically like a white box of a room, kind of like what a pharmacy would be on the inside, but it was just covered in like herbs and plants and all these things, and then all these kind of brass fixtures. And so anyway, point being, like, you don't have to fall into maybe like a preconceived notion. You can be a little bit clever about it.
Yeah.
How about you, Michelle? Is there a thought about kind of like making sustainability visual, or is it more about being covert?
I mean, I'll go back to my favorite topic all day long. I think that biophilic design is exactly that. It's, you know, putting sustainable design as into the aesthetic forefront, you know. So I think a lot of early LEED certified buildings and a lot of early sustainable designs, the aesthetic of them didn't really reflect their values. And even though biophilic design can be used in many, many aesthetics in many different ways without, as Kim was saying, you know, shoving it in your face that we love plants and wood and things like that, it can be used in really sophisticated ways, but it can also, it's also a way, it's a sustainable design strategy, I think, because it can be a way to promote environmental values through design.
I think that's all we have for the panel, but I think we have a little bit of time for Q&A. And do we have some good questions? This has been an awesome conversation so far. So first of all, thank all three of you. It's been great. I have a ton of notes and questions myself, but I want to make sure we get to some questions from the audience. What do we have? Q&A?
Yeah, it looks like there's a couple. We have one from Daniel. What technical aspects do you incorporate when picking colors, and how do you establish those factors?
Yeah, good question. Anybody want to take the opening stab at that?
I'll jump in there. I mean, it kind of goes back to the comments I was making about when we select furniture or pieces that are going to be, you know, in the sun, for instance. We have to pay attention to details and making sure that a product is going to last and really still have that colorful impact that we intended for the space. So I think a lot of wearability, durability of whatever the material is, I think that's one way that we kind of look at it to make sure that that is going to last throughout the design.
Ashley, have you ever encountered any like difficulty like hitting a color spec with a particular material where you had to like maybe get more samples than expected, or because it was you know, the color just didn't like take to the material the way you thought or anything?
Yeah, I think it actually happens a lot with paint colors. When we are working on a project that is out of state, we're looking at the light in our office, and we have a couple of different ways that we, you know, can change the lighting and try and set it to what the actual space is going to be like. But that's probably the one that's the biggest challenge, is just making sure that then it really has the impact. And, you know, the other thing is what surface is it going on? Is it going on the ceiling? We had to actually like tape some paint samples up to the ceiling to see, because it changes the perspective. So I think that's that's one of them for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's something we haven't really talked about. And I mean, as I was saying to all of you before we came on the call, we moved to Portland about a year ago from Southern California, and the light is just so different. You know, the light is just it's so bright. It's so like on all the time, versus here in Portland, it's so like muted. You know, you're like living in like a giant softbox, right? And so, yeah, like thinking of color is so different. And I can even see it in like TV shows. I could be like, oh, that was shot in LA. Like you can see the light. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How about for Kim and Michelle, what are some of the technical challenges or aspects you faced with implementing color?
Yeah, I'll just sort of piggyback on light being huge, whether it's looking at color in a retail space, looking at it on a field, on grass, looking at it on a court, looking, you know, like depending on like what is the environment. So for me, a lot of times it's really getting to know what those environments are and how color can play off of those spaces. But then in terms of like things executing, I think in footwear, we always could push color really, really hard. So it's interesting as my career has progressed and I've done more with apparel where it's not the case at all, where you can just like put whatever super bright color you want on anything. So it's been interesting, this sort of like resetting my expectation of that, to understand like, oh, okay, like when you're dressing, you really need to make sure that you know, these big pieces are lining up. So you know, in footwear, I'm just so used to like these little pieces, and if one's a little bit off, it's like, you know, there's sort of like a tolerance level. But yeah, so it does definitely play a role in how I think about building a palette, because you need to have flexibility to pivot, because there are going to be some times where you are not getting that material to execute the color properly, and you have to make some calls. So in my experience, I've always had back pocket color ideas, because you might get all the way to a salesman sample on something and the factory still can't execute the whatever it is, the foam or the airbag TP, whatever the material might be. And you know, this is getting ready to go to market, and you know, in a few months, so you have to be able to pivot. Yeah,
know when to cut bait on something. How about you, Michelle?
I'd say that I agree with Ashley, and I think what's throwing me is the word technical in terms of color, because I think of technical in terms of material properties or construction and how things fit together and come together, but color, I think, just has a little bit less to do. I mean, I guess how Ashley said before about when you're putting something in the sunlight, you want to make sure it doesn't fade, but a lot of our manufacturers are coming out with new and improved technologies and products that are performance based, and that you can, if you wanted to put something bright blue in the window, it won't fade, you know? So.
I've run into some cases where, like, you know, you got to order like 100 chairs from Knoll or something, and you want a custom color, and then it just doesn't quite match the brand color, and somebody gets kind of bent. So, little things like that sometimes, it's just, you know, and you're dealing with like a third party vendor, and it's just, you know, sometimes some things can fall out of your control. You got to roll with it. And what's our next question?
Well, actually, to build off of that, Karina had a question: is color, temperature, and choice influenced by the local climate? If so, how?
Yeah, great question.
I can take that. I think is color temperature influenced by the local climate. I think that color selection is certainly influenced by the local climate. And I think a great example of that is looking at the difference between, you know, Portland and Miami, or, you know, New England, Boston and Miami. And there are certainly distinctive colors, regional colors that reflect the geographic place. And I see that definitely has an impact.
Mm-hmm.
How about for either of your projects, Ashley or Kim?
Yeah, that actually just reminded me, we have a project that is, it's Puerto Rican menu in terms of the food. And we initially introduced a palette and they're like, these colors wouldn't be in Puerto Rico. And it's because we're, you know, we're kind of thinking about DC and like what we have here. And they just had a lot of more bold colors and we had to introduce that. So I think overall it does definitely play a role in terms of, you know, that location and that climate and what's typical for that area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I think place has everything to do with color. You know, you kind of, you have to know where, like, I think I've already said this, sorry if I'm repeating myself, but you kind of have to know where the product is going to live and be seen. And so the lighting of that space is huge. And also, you know, back to color being really emotional and evocative. Yeah, when you can tie a color into a specific place, you're really, you know, you can really kind of pull at someone's heartstrings if it's a place that, you know, is really sort of sentimental or important.
Yeah, I mean, even just thinking about like my own homes that I've worked on, you know, our home in San Diego was a block from the Pacific Ocean, and it was just all about that light, these huge like 2-story windows. So I mean, almost everything was white. Like we were just like, let's just let it be about the light coming in and the shadows and the way it changes through the day. And in Portland, our home is very like, I don't know, I'd say like the colors are very Eames times Palm Springs, you know, because the environment is it's a little bit more gray, or these kind of like evergreen shades outside. And so, you know, like everything in our house is like bright orange and super bright blue, or these kind of teal colors. And it's kind of like a play off of the exterior to give you this kind of like bright, fun feeling in deliberate contrast to the region, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what other questions do you have, Anne? I think maybe we have time for one more.
Sure. Actually, let's go with kind of a broader question, which I'm really curious what everybody has to say about this. What color combinations do you think are on trend right now for your work, for your industry?
Yeah, great. That's a hard question. It's like with so much.
Super hard.
Yeah. Any, I guess, any macro trends that you're seeing or maybe pushing?
I think, again, it's back to being able to incorporate the neutral, natural tones, plus I would say controlled color clash. Maybe like a happier color clash, not so in your face, but sort of have like managing that sort of boldness and sort of serene color. I think you can't have too much of the neutral. You need to have a little bit of pop. So I would say like really soft colors paired with really saturated colors in ways that do cool color vibrational things.
Definitely. To jump on what Kim said, we've been doing a lot of contrast in terms of like lightness and darkness. So it still has lots of color to it, but just giving it a pop that way by having, you know, a lot of dark colors and then one bright color, that kind of thing also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been seeing that high contrast as well in terms of color, yes, but also just, you know, experiences, like a place that's really maybe enclosed and a little bit more about refuge with it next to a space that's all open and bright and, you know, it's experiential. I think that contrast is interesting.
Do you think like last year, I feel like I was seeing so many interiors and apparel palettes, like what have you, with these kind of like dusty colors. It's kind of like taking like a very saturated color and then like muting it down to this very dusty tone, and then like pairing it with like brasses and things. Do you think that that's kind of like moved through?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I'm really feeling periwinkle right now. I don't know why, but it's kind of goes along that dusty kind of vibe. And so I think what I've seen is like a lot of times what the color of the year is, I think it was ultraviolet, either last year or recently. And then I've seen that color kind of infiltrate everything and then, you know, get watered down a little bit so that it's kind of palatable for everyone. So that's kind of something I've seen happen too.
Yeah, I think that was kind of like the orchid color that we just launched, just this kind of like very muted down purple, right? Because it can just be, it can be a little much, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think color tints are huge too. So not going straight to a white or a beige or a gray, but like a tinted, either a tinted gray or a tinted white, can add some interest and depth that to sort of break up the natural tones or warmer earth tones.
How about you, Michelle? Anything that you're pushing there?
I said this before, and I tend to kind of avoid trendy colors in interior design. Like you said, the millennial pink and the brass, you know, faucets and things like that they definitely have their moment, but I think their moment is passing. So I tend to stick to the more timeless classic, you know, especially interiors are far less disposable. You know, they're around, they could be 10, 15 years, you know, before a lease expires and the tenant moving, you know, clients moving to another space. So tend to aim for avoiding the trends. If that doesn't help at all, but.
No, I mean, I always try to tell clients, like, let's focus on style over fashion, right? Like beauty over novelty. Because, you know, the difference to me is that something that is stylish can last a long time. It can endure changes and trends versus something that is trendy or fashionable. It's like, could be super hot for 10 minutes and then nobody wants it anymore. So it's a hard balance. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining. You know, Ashley, Kim, Michelle, this is like super helpful. I learned a ton and just have like pages of notes here. And I wish I could wrap it up with a succinct kind of closing statement, other than I just loved the concept that Kim said of a controlled clash as something to think about. I hope all of you that joined got something out of this. I hope you'll go check out KireiUSA.com to see all the new colors we launched and how it plays out through all the different wall and ceiling products, as well as the partitions we have in the line, which are becoming more and more of a desired product as we're kind of exploring how we go back to work safely. Any other closing thoughts or things I missed, Anne?
No, that was great. Thank you to the panelists for joining us. This was awesome. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you so much
for having me.
Hope you all had as much fun as I did talking to you. So I really appreciate it, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.